There have been countless movies over the years to cover such topics as the disturbed mind, the one-man crusader fighting for a cause even he doesn't understand, and soul-destroying loneliness. But if there was one movie that did a perfect job of covering all three of them at the same time, it would have to be Martin Scorsese's 1976 masterpiece Taxi Driver, telling the story of a disturbed war veteran that can't function in society and slips further and further away from reality as his trauma drives him insane. This movie may just be one of the best character introspectives ever put on film, which is only made better by the fact that you never find out who Travis Bickle was before being discharged from the military. And today, I'd like to go over why exactly this movie and the character of Travis Bickle in particular are done so well and thus are so highly regarded. And needless to say, there will be spoilers ahead, so if you somehow don't know anything about this film, I would highly suggest you click off the video. Okay, so to get right into it, in my video on All the President's Men, which you can find a link in the description to, I go on at length about how the early 1970s had a problem when it came to building tension in their thrillers, and how the aforementioned movie was one of the few exceptions to that. But Taxi Driver is most definitely another, and maybe even more so at that, as while not often advertised as a thriller, it knows exactly how to keep building tension as it becomes more and more obvious to the viewer just how unhinged Travis actually is and how it's only a matter of time before he cracks and does something terrible. And this is only punctuated by the fact that the world is depicted almost solely through Bickle's warped point of view, seeing everything and everyone at their absolute worst, and how the few good people in it are doomed to become victims of the scum that infect and permeate everything. Befitting the fact that Travis is very disturbed and most likely suffering from extreme PTSD due to the horrors he had to experience, the way he sees the world is also a reflection of the way he sees himself. Because while he despises all that is bad in the world, he also has a love and compulsion for violence that he tries so desperately to repress, but can't help but indulge in every once in a while. And this is why such things as his deranged passenger, who goes on a long rant about how he's going to kill his wife and lover, can leave him both disgusted and fascinated, because on the one hand, the man represents everything Bickle hates about the world, but on the other, he secretly loves the idea of something so violent, to the point that he even tries to buy a gun of the same make that he describes later on. But as he continues to indulge in such violent fantasies, his better nature tries to repress them, which is a major reason why he becomes so obsessed with Iris and seems determined to save her, because in essence, she represents everything he sees as good in the world, and her employers and customers are the usual scum trying to corrupt and destroy what is good. In very simple terms, Taxi Driver is about a man who can't stand the world he lives in, so he copes with it by retreating into his own broken head and living out fantasies of fixing the world through the only method he knows how: violence. But once again, Travis may be disturbed, but he isn't exactly evil, which is why he tries so hard to repress his violent urges and have something resembling a normal life. But when that inevitably fails, he only descends deeper into his delusions and finally copes with it by combining the two different sides of his personality. In other words, for most of the film, the more violent side of Bickle and the part that hates all that is bad in the world are at odds with each other because his better part hates the worst part, which only causes him to despise the scum and filth even more, thus fueling his desire for change and compulsion for violence as well. As with his disturbed mind, that is his way of acting out when he doesn't like how things are. And as I just noted, this cycle inevitably ends with him embracing both parts of himself, deciding that he'll rid the world of all that is horrible himself by embracing his compulsion for violence. Now, obviously from the outside, that sounds like a terrible idea, as it most definitely should, but for somebody as disturbed as Travis, it's the only conclusion he can reach. And this is where the irony of the movie's ending comes into play, because Travis only ends up hailed as a hero because he ended up going after the quote, right target. If he had actually succeeded in attacking Senator Palpatine, he would have rightfully been reviled as any other would-be assassin. But when he's unable to, he ends up turning his anger and aggression on the only other target that he's come to personally hate throughout the film, Iris's evil pimps. And because he succeeds in wiping them out and therefore saving their victims, he actually ends up being hailed as the hero who would save others that he desired to be. But once again, he could have just as easily ended up a political assassin, because by that point he can't understand who the real enemy is anymore, nor that violence is most definitely not the answer to all the world's problems. And to that end, his being seen as a hero who saved a helpless girl doesn't really make him feel any better about himself. And the only reason he can backtrack down the path he was going is both because nobody understands just how unhinged he is due to the fact that what he did is seen as a good thing, and because his urge for violence has been temporarily satisfied. In other words, he more or less got what he wanted in the end, but it doesn't help him, nor will the comfort that comes with it last forever. And as Martin Scorsese has explained on many occasions, that's what the ending is supposed to mean, that what Travis did will happen again, only next time things won't work out so well. In the end, Taxi Driver is really a look into the mind of a man who was psychologically damaged by war and didn't get the proper treatment for it, leaving behind a mentally ill man who dives deeper and deeper into his illness in order to cope with his misgivings about both the world and himself. Because like I said before, Travis is not evil. He's not an inherently bad person, but his trauma and the broken mind it leaves him with results in him having violent impulses and an inability to rationalize things in a healthy, normal way. So as a result, the good person he undoubtedly was is corrupted into seeing the world as a living hell, and his attempts to deal with it only drive him further over the edge. And Robert De Niro's perfect performance only adds even more layers to this already complex character, as just by hearing him talk, you know that there's something wrong with him. But the fact that he's really just the good and bad sides of a broken mind fighting for control, and the good giving more and more weight to the bad as it comes to see it as the only way to fix things, is also just as evident. Because Bickle does genuinely believe in bettering the world and can't stand the way things are, but unlike what most normal people would do and go about trying to improve things through more practical and ethical means, Travis believes that such measures aren't effective and comes to believe that the only way to actually change things is through violent action. But considering how screwed up his mind was by war, it was basically a given that without proper mental health and treatment, that's the only conclusion he would inevitably reach. And because he didn't get any help to aid him in coping with what he experienced and wasn't taught how to handle his trauma and was instead left to fend for himself in the world, Travis Bickle is really just as much a victim of society as anybody else. Because again, without the proper help, his eventual breakdown was basically a foregone conclusion. Though none of this is obviously meant to excuse his behavior, but more just explain why he ends up going down the path he does. Because when he says there wasn't any real choice for him, in a way he's actually correct, just not in the way he's talking about. Like I said at the beginning, when all is said and done, Taxi Driver is basically a character study of a mentally disturbed war veteran and how he descends deeper and deeper into mental illness as his attempts to reckon with everything around him, both physically and mentally, continue to fall apart. And while this could have easily made for a rather bleak, and even boring, experience to sit through, Martin Scorsese manages to get all of this across in a way that leaves the viewer absolutely captivated by everything they're seeing, and especially the character of Travis Bickle himself. Though what definitely helps in this department is that he tells a good chunk of the story through Travis's point of view, allowing the audience to get even just a hint of what a depressing, unfulfilling, and ultimately lonely life this man leads, and how he eventually comes to feel that going out in a blaze of glory to save the world is the only option he has left. and it ends up painting such a compelling, if haunting, picture of how those with mental illness cope with their flawed view of reality that very few movies since have even come close to achieving what this movie has. Because while it may just be one great tragedy disguised as something greater, kinda like Travis Bickle himself, what it's able to say with that tragedy is what makes this movie a masterpiece. Okay, I think I've gone on about this for long enough. So now why don't all of you tell me? Do you believe that Taxi Driver is truly one of the best movies in all of cinema, and Travis Bickle one of the greatest characters created for the silver screen? Or do you believe the whole thing is overrated? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Because if you think I was wrong about everything I just said, that is completely fine. You can feel about Taxi Driver and the way it tells its story however you'd like, and I'll respect your opinion as long as everybody is respectful of everyone else's in turn. And thank you all for watching. It is all really appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.